When Kelsey Mitchell's body literally shut down in the middle of a playoff game, her legs going completely numb as she collapsed on the court, nobody knew if she'd ever play again. But what the doctors told her afterward, that's the part that'll make your jaw drop. Picture this. Game 5 of the WNBA playoffs, the Indiana Fever fighting for their season, and suddenly their star guard can't feel her feet. Her legs completely paralyzed. The arena went silent as teammates surrounded her, praying, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. But here's the thing nobody's talking about. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was rhabdomyolysis, a condition so severe that your muscles literally break down and release proteins into your bloodstream that can shut down your kidneys. And Kelsey, she played until her body gave her no choice but to stop. Before we dive into what really happened that night and why doctors called it a once-in-a-lifetime event, smash that like button and subscribe, because we're about to expose the brutal reality of what these athletes go through that nobody wants to talk about. The WNBA doesn't want you knowing just how far these players push their bodies, but Kelsey Mitchell is finally speaking out. Let's rewind to that moment on the court. Kelsey had just hit a three-pointer, she was feeling good, playing at an elite level, doing what she does best. Then suddenly, as she's running back on defense, something goes horribly wrong. She describes it like her stomach dropped to her legs. At first, she thought it was just cramps, that time of the month situation that female athletes deal with, but rarely talk about publicly. But this was different. This was her body screaming that it had reached its absolute limit. Within seconds, Kelsey's body locked up. Not like a muscle cramp where you can stretch it out. We're talking complete paralysis of her lower body. She couldn't move her legs, she couldn't feel her feet. When she fell, she landed on assistant coach Isaac Peebles, and even in that terrifying moment, she was worried about him not knowing what was happening. Her teammates rushed over immediately. Leah Boston, the young star center, started praying over her right there on the court. Lexie Hull grabbed her hand and wouldn't let go. Bria Turner kept telling her, "Kelsey, your legs are going to move eventually. Just breathe. They're going to move." But here's what makes this even more intense. Kelsey refused the stretcher. In the middle of a medical emergency where she literally couldn't walk, she told the medical staff absolutely not. She said, and I quote, "We're not doing a stretcher, man. I'm not walking out of here on a stretcher." Can you imagine the mental toughness that takes? Your body has completely failed you, you're scared out of your mind, and you're still thinking about how you want to leave that court. So instead, they carried her off, her feet dangling because there was zero blood flow to her lower extremities. The image of her being carried off while refusing medical equipment? That's the kind of warrior mentality that defines Kelsey Mitchell. What happened next would shock everyone, including the doctors. When they got Kelsey to the medical area, the Vegas doctors and the Fever's medical staff ran tests immediately. The diagnosis? Rhabdomyolysis, but not just any case of it. This was severe enough that Kelsey had lost a dangerous amount of fluid from her body. For those who don't know, rhabdomyolysis happens when you push your muscles so hard that they literally start breaking down. The muscle tissue releases a protein called myoglobin into your bloodstream, and if there's too much of it, it can clog up your kidneys and cause complete kidney failure. People have died from this condition. Athletes have had their careers ended by it. And Kelsey? She was sitting in that medical room, unable to feel her feet, being told that she'd pushed her body to a point that most people never reach. The doctors told her something that should terrify every WNBA fan. This was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Think about that phrase for a second. Once in a lifetime. That means in all their years of treating professional athletes, with all the cases they've seen of exhaustion and overuse injuries, what happened to Kelsey was so rare, so extreme, that they'd probably never see it again. She had literally played until her wheels fell off, just like she'd promised her teammates she would. But the question everyone started asking was, how did it get to this point? Drop a comment right now telling us, should the WNBA be doing more to protect players from pushing themselves this far? Because what we're about to reveal is going to change how you see the league forever. Kelsey herself admits she'd never played this long in a season before. This was her first time making the playoffs, her first taste of postseason basketball at the professional level. For years, she'd been grinding, working, trying to get to this moment. And when it finally came, she wasn't about to let anything stop her. Not fatigue, not soreness, not warning signs from her body. She committed to the work, showed up for every practice, did everything the coaches asked and more. She even joked in her press conference that she doesn't blame head coach Stephanie White for all that practicing, but you could hear the underlying message. The workload was intense. Here's where it gets controversial. The Fever's playoff schedule was brutal. They played Game 4, then had to travel the very next day for Game 5. That's barely any recovery time for professional athletes who are already running on fumes at the end of a long season. Kelsey did all her normal treatment protocols. She did everything she was supposed to do to prepare her body. But sometimes, as she put it, life just happens. The combination of the extended season, the playoff intensity, the travel, the lack of rest days, it all added up to a perfect storm that her body couldn't handle. But that wasn't the whole story. What Kelsey revealed in her press conference exposed something deeper about women's sports that people don't want to acknowledge. She mentioned that it was that time of the month when this happened, and she initially thought the pain was just cramps. Female athletes dealing with their menstrual cycles while competing at the highest level is something that gets glossed over constantly. The cramping, the fatigue, the hormonal changes, all of that affects performance and recovery. But these women are expected to just push through it. Never complain, never make excuses. And Kelsey, she pushed through it until her body physically couldn't anymore. The scariest part of her story is what happened in those minutes when she was on the floor. She couldn't feel her feet. Her legs were completely numb. She described the sensation as her legs being paralyzed, which is a terrifying word to hear from an athlete whose entire career depends on her mobility. In those moments, she didn't know if this was permanent. She didn't know if she'd ever play basketball again. She didn't know if this was a career-ending injury or something even worse. The fear in her voice when she talked about it days later was still palpable. This wasn't just a scary moment. This was a moment where she had to confront the possibility that everything she'd worked for could be over. Her teammates became her lifeline in that moment. The way she described their support, the love they showed her, the way they refused to leave her side, that's what team chemistry really looks like. Leah Boston, who's dealing with her own pressures as a young star trying to live up to expectations, stopped everything to pray over Kelsey. Lexie Hull, who's been grinding for her role on the team, held Kelsey's hand and wouldn't let go. These weren't just teammates, they were sisters going through battle together. And when Kelsey was finally taken off the court, those same teammates had to somehow refocus and finish the game without her. Which brings us to what happened after Kelsey left. The Fever had to play the rest of that crucial playoff game without their leading scorer, without one of their primary ball handlers, without the veteran presence that had guided them through so much adversity all season. Odyssey Sims, the backup point guard, had to step up in a massive way. Lexie Hull had to finish the game while emotionally dealing with what she'd just witnessed. Temi Fagbinley had to hold down the paint. And you know what? Fought. They didn't quit. They made sure that even though they were losing their teammate to a medical emergency, the other team would remember their names. Kelsey talked about this with so much pride in her voice. Even though she was going through her own trauma, she was thinking about her teammates and how they responded. She gave shout-outs to Odyssey for being a competitor, to Lexie for finishing strong, to Temi for making sure they didn't go out quietly. That's leadership. That's what it means to be a veteran in this league. Even when you're the one who's hurt, you're thinking about everyone else. Now here's where the story takes an interesting turn as we move into 2025. Kelsey mentioned that this experience taught her a valuable lesson about knowing what her body needs to compete at a playoff level. She had to learn the hard way that there's a difference between regular season conditioning and playoff conditioning. The intensity ramps up, the physicality increases, the mental strain multiplies. And for someone who'd never been there before, there was no way to prepare for it except to go through it. The doctors told her that going forward, she shouldn't expect this to happen again. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime perfect storm of circumstances that led to the rhabdomyolysis. But here's what's wild. Kelsey said she wouldn't change anything. Not one practice, not one workout, not one moment of preparation. She said it was all worth it because she got to experience playing in the playoffs, competing at the highest level, and giving everything she had for her team. She literally said, "I played until my wheels fell off like I told you guys." And she meant it as a badge of honor. That mentality is both inspiring and concerning. On one hand, you have to respect the dedication, the commitment, the warrior spirit that makes someone willing to sacrifice their body for the team. On the other hand, is this sustainable? Should athletes be praised for pushing themselves to the point of medical emergencies? Where's the line between admirable toughness and dangerous disregard for long-term health? The WNBA has been dealing with increased scrutiny about player workload and rest protocols. With the league expanding, with more games being added to schedules, with playoff series going deeper, these questions become more important. Kelsey Mitchell's case isn't just about one player having a scary moment. It's about what happens when you ask elite athletes to perform at maximum capacity for months on end with minimal recovery time. It's about the pressure these women feel to prove they belong, to show they can handle whatever is thrown at them, to never complain or show weakness. What makes Kelsey's situation even more relevant now in 2025 is the broader conversation happening about women's sports and athlete health. We've seen other players speak out about the grind of the season. We've seen injuries pile up across the league. We've seen stars miss time because their bodies simply couldn't keep up with the demands. Kelsey's rhabdomyolysis diagnosis was extreme, but the underlying issues that led to it, those are affecting players across the entire WNBA. Think about the context of that fever season, too. They dealt with massive adversity all year long. Kelsey mentioned the impact of losing Caitlin Clark, which was huge for the team's dynamic. Now, to clarify, since we're in 2025, when Kelsey was referring to losing CC, she meant during specific stretches when Caitlin was out, or during the previous season's challenges. The roster changes, the injuries to key players, the constant adjustments to lineups and rotations, all of that added stress to the players who were available. Kelsey, as a veteran leader, felt the weight of having to carry more of the load when others couldn't play. She talked about how hard it is to establish culture when you're constantly bringing people in and out of the rotation due to injuries and roster moves. The Fever could have folded under that pressure. They could have packed it in, accepted a losing season, and looked ahead to the next year. But they didn't. They fought for every win, made it to the playoffs when nobody expected them to, and competed until they literally couldn't anymore. That's the story that gets lost in the scary medical emergency. This team overachieved despite everything working against them. The moment when Kelsey finally got to reunite with her team after the medical scare, she said there was a lot of crying, a lot of emotions, a lot of love shared between people who'd been through life together for 5 or 6 months. That's what a season feels like for these players. It's not just a job, it's a shared experience that bonds you to people in ways that are hard to explain. When you've been in the trenches with someone, when you've seen them at their lowest and highest, when you've fought battles together, that creates a connection that goes beyond basketball. Kelsey made sure to emphasize how grateful she felt for her teammates. She said without them, she doesn't think she would have gotten through the experience. The way Leah Boston prayed over her, the way Lexie Hull held her hand, the way Bria Turner kept reassuring her that her legs would move again, those moments of human connection in the middle of a crisis are what she'll remember forever. She said she'd go to war with those women any day, and you could hear in her voice that she meant every word. The physical recovery from rhabdomyolysis isn't quick. Kelsey admitted that 2 days after the incident, she still didn't feel ready to play in a real game. She estimated she'd need more time to truly reset, to get her bloodstream flowing properly again, to allow her body to heal from the trauma it had endured. She talked about needing to get her body in the flows that it needs to be, to compete at an elite level, which is an interesting way of describing the delicate balance athletes have to maintain between pushing hard and not breaking down. The doctors didn't give her any long-term restrictions or warnings beyond the immediate recovery period. They confirmed it was a freak occurrence, not something she'd need to worry about happening again under normal circumstances. But Kelsey herself acknowledged that this was a learning experience about her own body. She needed to figure out what specifically her body requires to maintain playoff-level performance without crossing that line into dangerous territory. That's the maturity that comes from going through something traumatic. You learn, you adjust, you come back smarter. Here's something that didn't get enough attention in the immediate aftermath. Kelsey refused to let them use a wheelchair to get her off the court. Even after they convinced her that a stretcher wasn't happening, she still had enough pride and determination to insist on being carried rather than wheeled out. She joked about it afterward, saying she wasn't about to let people see her leave on a stretcher, that she was going to get off that floor on her own terms one way or another. Her feet were literally dangling because she had no blood flow to move them, but in her mind, being carried off by staff was better than being wheeled off on medical equipment. That detail tells you everything about the mindset of elite athletes. Even in their most vulnerable moments, they're thinking about perception, about image, about not showing weakness. Is that healthy? Probably not. Is it understandable given the culture of professional sports? Absolutely. These players are taught from a young age that toughness matters, that you play through pain, that you never let them see you quit. Kelsey embodied all of that in her refusal to accept the stretcher or wheelchair. The turning point in her recovery came when she started to feel her toes move again. She was in the huddle area, still pretty numb, still scared, but then her toes started wiggling. That small movement gave her hope that this wasn't permanent, that the blood flow was returning, that her body was starting to recover. Papa Todd, one of the team's staff members, kept her calm throughout the ordeal, repeatedly telling her that her legs would eventually start moving once the blood flow returned. That reassurance, that calm presence in the middle of chaos, helped her get through the worst of it. As we look at this situation from the perspective of 2025, it raises important questions about the future of the WNBA. The league is growing rapidly. Viewership is up, sponsorships are increasing, more games are being televised. But with that growth comes increased pressure on the players to perform at higher levels for longer periods. Are the support systems in place to handle that increased demand? Are teams doing enough to monitor player health and prevent situations like Kelsey's from happening? Should there be mandatory rest days built into playoff schedules? These are conversations the league needs to have. Kelsey's case also highlights the mental toughness required to play professional basketball. She talked about how nobody expected the Fever to make the playoffs, how they had to handle constant adversity, how they lost key players to injuries throughout the season, the mental strain of constantly having to adjust, to overcome, to prove doubters wrong. That takes a toll that doesn't show up in box scores. The fact that this team kept fighting, kept believing, kept pushing until they literally couldn't anymore, that's a testament to their character and their leadership. The reaction from fans and media after Kelsey's collapse was intense. Social media exploded with concern, with prayers, with demands for better player protection. People who'd never heard of rhabdomyolysis were suddenly researching it, understanding just how serious the condition can be. The WNBA community rallied around Kelsey, showing the kind of support that makes this league special. Players from other teams reached out. Fans sent messages. The outpouring of love reminded everyone that these aren't just athletes, they're human beings putting their bodies on the line for our entertainment. What's fascinating is how Kelsey framed the entire experience afterward. She didn't complain about the workload, she didn't blame the coaches or the schedule or the circumstances. She took full ownership, saying she's a professional who does what needs to be done, who commits to the work without complaining. She saw it as a learning opportunity to better understand her body's limits and needs. That level of accountability and professionalism is rare, and it's part of what makes her such a respected veteran in the league. The bigger picture here is about what we ask of women athletes. We want them to be tough, but not too tough. We want them to compete at the highest level, but also take care of their health. We want them to push through adversity, but not to the point of medical emergencies. It's an impossible balance, and Kelsey Mitchell's story exposes just how fine that line really is. She did everything right, followed all the protocols, committed to all the work, and still ended up with a once-in-a-lifetime medical condition because sometimes the human body just has limits. Before we wrap this up, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're going to keep following Kelsey's recovery and the broader implications for player health in the WNBA. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates, and drop a comment telling us, do you think the WNBA needs to make changes to protect players from situations like this? We want to hear your thoughts. The legacy of what happened to Kelsey Mitchell in that playoff game will extend far beyond just one scary moment. It's a wake-up call for the league, for teams, for players themselves about the real costs of competition at the highest level. It's a reminder that these athletes are pushing their bodies to extremes that most of us can't even imagine. And it's a testament to the warrior spirit that defines women's basketball, where players will literally give everything they have, even when their bodies are screaming at them to stop. Kelsey said she'd trade her body in every time for the experience of competing in the playoffs with her team. That's the mentality of a champion, of someone who values the journey and the bond with teammates more than personal safety. It's admirable and terrifying in equal measure. As fans, we love seeing that level of dedication. As humans, we have to ask if we're asking too much. The Indiana Fever's season ended that night, but the lessons from Kelsey Mitchell's collapse will resonate for years to come. How do we balance the desire for elite competition with the need for player safety? How do we create schedules that allow for proper recovery? How do we support athletes who are dealing with the physical demands of their sport, plus the additional challenges that come with being women competing at the highest level? These aren't easy questions, but Kelsey's story forces us to confront them head-on. And maybe, just maybe, her sacrifice will lead to changes that protect the next generation of WNBA players from having to learn these lessons the hard way.